big news story early this week. Now, while the causes or the cause of the disaster is still being ascertained, relief and rescue operations are on as they should be. That is the priority at this point. In Government Matters today, I have two experts, Abantika Ghosh and Mohana Basu, both of whom will try and unravel what really happened and what kind of relief and rescue operations are on at this point. In fact, two of our reporters, Angana Chakrabarti as well as Surat Singh Bisht, have reached the spot, so you will be able to read their ground report very soon. Abantika, let's start talking a little bit about what has happened since yesterday. What is the information we have so far?
Right. So, what exactly happened, in the sense, what triggered this huge rush of boulder and water and this huge human tragedy, that is not very clear. There are some theories at this point of time. One of those theories is that it is possible that there was a lake that had been formed at the tip of a glacier, which so these lakes are usually bound by boulders and moraine and all of that, and for some reason that might have been breached, and the water came gushing down. So, and that could have happened because there was a landslide at the back, there was an avalanche at the back. There were already, over the last 2 days, there were some reports of an avalanche in the area in the local control room. That could have triggered it. Then it could have been a landslide that happened. That part of what really triggered it is not very clear, but there are some theories right now, and immediately the local reaction has been, because Uttarakhand has had in the past mishaps like the 2013 disaster, which left over 5,000 people dead. There are a lot of misgivings about the development work there. So locals have already started talking about it, but right now there is no conclusive theory about what might have triggered. But there is a team that has gone from Dehradun, from the Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology. That team, once they have reached the spot and once they have done their ground surveys and try to figure out what happened, there may be more clarity in the coming days.
All right. Mona, you're the science person here. I'm sure you've been talking to experts ever since the tragedy, was known. What are various experts saying? As Abantika said, there are various theories that are being, touted.
So basically, what we have to understand is, a flash flood is what there's like a sudden flow of water in a landscape that in itself is very vulnerable, and basically you have steep slopes, so there is a lot of momentum with the water causing a lot of damage. So what experts are saying right now is that they have no idea where this huge amount of water came from. As she said, there are theories that the flood was triggered by landslides, or initially it was called a Gloff event, but where was that reservoir of water that actually came down is something that people are still trying to ascertain. There are some theories about a hidden lake under a layer of an older glacier or debris from previous glaciers, but right now there is no, like she said, there's no conclusive evidence of the
fact. Show what happened.
Right. So what the Wadia Institute researchers have to do now is they have already reached the spot, and they have to figure out what are some of the signatures left behind by perhaps a lake that had been formed and that had not been visible to scientists before, or signatures that are left by landslides and these kind of things. Any kind of geological clue that can help understand exactly what happened here.
Right. Mona, what makes Uttarakhand a particularly vulnerable territory?
See, it's very, very obvious in the sense that, the Himalayas in itself is basically a very, it's a dynamic landscape. It's changing, even though it's very slow. We can't see it, but it's basically two tectonic plates being pushed up against each other, which means that it is constantly, experiencing earthquakes. Right. It's one of the youngest mountains, and it is constantly experiencing earthquakes, and there are landslides, and adding to that is the fact that those areas are now, are very developed. There are human establishments, and as the years progress, there's more and more constructions which put an extra amount of pressure in an already vulnerable ecosystem.
Right. Abantika, can you throw some light on the relief and rescue operations that are on, and how far have we reached?
Right. So the last I spoke, I spoke to Angona. We're also in touch with ITBP there, which
Right.
is leading ITBP, NDRF, which are leading these rescue operations. So a while back when I spoke to them, what I heard is that we've reached about the halfway mark, and there are still about 200 people missing. Apart from the dead that we've already reported this morning, there are
Right.
some 200 people missing halfway down the tunnel. And we are hoping that maybe we should be, by nightfall today, we should be able to complete a significant amount of that
Stretch.
that remaining stretch, and hopefully get some of hopefully get all of these people back. But also ITBP is very specialized in these sorts of things. And one of the things, like when you asked this tunnel, the boring activity, that is kind of making a lot of these hills a little unsteady. But whether again that triggered this particular event is not known. There are a lot of other construction works going on. There is a very prestigious Char Dham project that is happening
Right.
there. Whether all of these things have triggered, that's for a later date. But right now, ITBP is hard at work, and we'll get some updates soon.
Okay. So let's start taking some audience questions. The first one is from Aldrin Abhishek. Have the steps been taken to reduce flooding in the downstream of Alaknanda River? News says 2 hydropower plants washed away, but now many are there. How many are there in the river? So either of you can jump in.
So, this is the hydropower projects there are a matter of a Supreme Court, case after the 2013 landslide. There was a committee that had been formed that looked at all these projects and looked at the impact of development. So I was just looking at some numbers. There are about 92 projects there. 15 large and medium projects, and then there are 38 projects with an installed capacity of 3292 megawatts. There are 8 large and medium projects that account for 97% of the capacity.
Right.
So, and also, there was a time post 2013 when the Supreme Court had said that you cannot have any more hydropower projects there. And at that point of time, the Uttarakhand government, I think in August last year, had actually submitted an affidavit and said, we are very short of power. Please let these projects go on. And then the Supreme Court had said that maybe we can shift some of these projects, after which the projects, mostly the government-owned ones, NTPC and all, they had said that no, we will obey all the guidelines, so please let us continue with this. So the projects there are, they are there, they are working, but again, there is this, somehow we are jumping to the conclusion that the projects have got to do something with it because 2 projects are affected. That may be a little early in the day to link it directly to the hydropower projects.
Right.
Questions will be asked about the hydropower project, even about the Char Dham project. But from the inputs right now, it will be a leap of faith.
Right. So too premature to sort of blame these projects or to ascribe, the landslide or whatever happened to these projects.
Right. There may be, for example, there may be an element of global warming.
Right.
That's got very little to do with what is happening on the ground there. Because, see, these kinds of events, even 2013, it happened in June. That's the time, summer, monsoon, those are the times, monsoon especially, when these kinds of events are, a cloudburst or something of this sort. That's when these things happen. It's rarer in winter. So, for example, if we go with this Gloft theory, Gloft, like she mentioned, Gloft is that glacial lake that I described. So if we go by that theory, then ideally at that height, that lake should have been frozen now.
In fact, interestingly, Abantika, you seem to have preempted the next question from Aldrin Abhishek. This is exactly what he's asking. He's saying the 2013 Kedarnath incident took place during monsoon, but at this time it's freezing temperature at Nanda Devi peak, and then how could there have been a glacial melt?
Exactly, that's what we don't know. And to my limited understanding of this, I would think global warming more than development work. No matter how much development work I do, no matter how many roads I construct, how many hydropower projects I do, it would be difficult for me to create conditions when a whole lake, which should ideally be frozen, will melt.
Right.
So that is something that this group probably will be able to
ascertain.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Mohana?
Right. There was no rainfall or cloud burst, but I did speak to one scientist from IIT Roorkee who said that they did see huge amounts of snowfall in that particular area between 2nd Feb to 6th Feb, which again they don't really know what may triggered whether it may have any implications, but these are like limited clues. These are some clues that are coming in from that place. So again, like any small change in that area, because it's already a fragile system, may have led to an event like this. And coming to the point of hydropower plants, the report that you're talking about, that also mentioned how the Tewari Dam in 2013 may have actually helped.
In fact, you're doing a story.
Yeah, it may have actually protected parts of Haridwar from getting completely inundated. But again, these are all different kinds of speculations that we have, and we need to figure out a way to use these dams to protect ourselves from such extreme events, because we cannot actually predict them. They are called extreme events for a reason.
Right.
That report actually also spoke about the lack of forecasting equipment.
Yeah, so basically, for example, if you take the example of cyclones, it's a slow forming disaster. We have the mechanism to predict it and therefore evacuate that area that might be affected and then save lives. We can't stop the cyclone. So similarly, we need a forecasting measure which can tell how much water might be flowing into a dam, whether it can take a sudden extreme event. And if that is true, if there's too much water already in the reservoir, then how can they manage that flow of water by opening or closing the barrage gates? That is something that needs to be put in place instead of completely doing away with hydropower projects, which at this point, frankly, we can't really afford to do.
Right. All right. So there are many questions on how a lake could melt in winters, which we've already taken. There is a question from Hitesh Nautiyal on the evacuation plan. Abantika has already explained that. Tanveer Panjwani, isn't this mishap because of environmental imbalance in building hydroelectric dams without caring for nature? So I think, as you mentioned, both of you have cautioned against jumping to this conclusion so early, but anything you would want to add to that?
Yeah, environmental impact, certainly. There is something in that environment there which has gone wrong. Whether that has got to do with local activities or that has got to do with overall global warming, that is something that needs to be seen. Certainly there are inputs of human behavior in this, but human behavior where, how, when is the question. To what extent is the question that we don't yet have the answer to.
All right. So there's another question. Himalayas is an active tectonic zone. Why have we constructed more hydropower projects on it? The pressure from dams and seismic activity is already a ticking time bomb. Then why? Mona, would you like to take that?
See, again, it's it's basically an exchange between how much of development you want and how much of basically like Uttarakhand is a new state.
But
right?
Is it a bit unfair to call it a trade-off and sort of jump to that conclusion at this point? Is the whole question.
See, again, so this is something, it's not completely related, but I mean it is a good analogy. When I've been reporting about disasters, so something that disaster management, modern theories talk about is if you take an earthquake, for example, an earthquake in itself is not a disaster. It's a disaster when there's a building standing where the earthquake is happening. So our effort cannot be to stop the earthquake, but to rather make a building that is earthquake resilient. So similarly, we cannot stop a state from developing. We do need
these projects.
Exactly. We need low cost power sources, and Himalayas, it's basic physics. It's kinetic energy, or you have water falling from a height. It makes power. It's one of the easiest sources of energy. So that we cannot stop that per se. But again, like I talked about barrages and having a forecasting system in place, that is what we need to work on.
So how to make the area safer and more, sort of resilient to these natural disasters is perhaps the question at this point.
Exactly.
Okay, I'll take one last question, Abantika. This is from Anubha Dhulia. If at all in the recent future an artificial hand is discovered, say for example these projects, do you think it should be the government who can be liable or the environmental authorities approving the projects? So, let me just frame this question a little differently, that there is a lot of concern around these projects, which we've seen in the form of all these questions that have also come in. What has the government said anything so far, and what have past tragedies like these told us about the government's response?
So most of the questions are about the hydropower projects. But there is something on which the government has said something in this area, and that's the Char Dham project. So the Char Dham project, basically, it tries to connect the 4 pilgrimage sites of Gangotri, Yamunotri, Kedarnath and Badrinath. And we are trying to construct 816 kilometer of road, which is supposed to be 10 meters. Now, the Supreme Court last year in September had said that the width of the Char Dham road cannot be more than 5.5 meters. And the government has actually said that we have completed 537 kilometers of this 10 meter width road, and it is not possible now to break it.
Right.
So they want to continue with it. That's development again. I think people, it's a very weird trade-off, but to my mind, people need power more than they need better roads to reach pilgrimage sites, right? Power is a more basic necessity.
Right.
So that is why these questions are very tricky. Once you start raising them, they don't stop with one thing.
And no easy answers.
There are no easy answers. Uttarakhand, for example, apart from being young mountains, anybody who's traveled in Uttarakhand can see the number of streams that crisscross across those mountains. They basically erode the mountain from within.
Right.
That's why it's so landslide prone. There are many natural factors that contribute to this. All of those have to be analyzed. Yes, environment is very important, and the human tragedy that these kinds of environmental disasters mean, that we need to look at environment for human beings as well. I mean, it's not just a cosmetic thing. But having said that, you have to strike a balance. It's not one thing versus the other.
It's not either or.
It's both together. How can they go on? That's the balance we need to strike. That's what we are still learning, probably.
In fact, when you speak of Char Dham and the government's contention as well as what the environmental concerns are, we've done a very detailed government matters with Bhadra Sinha, who covers the Supreme Court for us. So you can perhaps go back to that and watch it for more information on what the entire debate is around. Thank you so much for watching Government Matters. This is a terrible tragedy at this point. Of course, the focus is on rescue and relief operations. The causes will be ascertained in due course. But as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, we have our reporting team on the ground. So stay tuned for their reports from Ground Zero.